For many who have served their time, the punishment continues, especially when it comes to finding a place to live. And for many of the formerly incarcerated, living with relatives or going back to their families living in public housing is not an option in a new world where their choices are already limited.
As a society, we preach rehabilitation, but we practice revenge.
And Congressman Richie Torres says current NYCHA policy relating to formerly incarcerated individuals is pretty close to just that. The New York City Housing Authority is the nation's largest administrator of public housing. It also has some of the strictest eviction and resident requirements. Under its policies, tenants arrested for a misdemeanor can be banned from public housing for a minimum of 3 years, and those arrested for a felony up to 6. And in most cases, the formerly incarcerated need not apply.
I made some mistakes as a teenager, mistakes I have never repeated. I paid my dues and was released 5 years ago in 2016.
Christine Johnson did her time. She applied for public housing not long after her release. Almost 4 years later, with a young son, she was approved and paid a deposit on her new apartment, only to be told at the last moment her past incarceration made her ineligible.
I was embarrassed. I felt humiliated. And I honestly can say that was the first time since being released I felt discrimination.
With the help of the Fortune Society, an advocacy group for the formerly incarcerated and for whom she's worked for 4 years, and some sympathetic ears at NYCHA, she appealed, was reconsidered, approved, and hopes to move into a new apartment soon. But she knows she's one of the lucky ones. State Assemblyman Kenny Burgos has introduced legislation to remove NYCHA's discriminatory policies, but says NYCHA could stop today.
We must provide a fair chance for justice-involved New Yorkers to rebuild their lives, reunite with their families, and rejoin their communities. And this legislation is critical towards the goal as our duty as leaders to provide opportunity to our constituents.
Also under NYCHA's permanent exclusion rules, a tenant can be faced with eviction for having an excluded person living with them or even visiting, meaning faced with the prospect of losing their home, likely the only place they can afford. Many tenants are faced with the choice of keeping their homes or tearing apart their families.
NYCHA's policy of discriminating against anybody with a criminal history is cruel and unusual. It is punitive and excessive, and these policies must be repealed.
In a statement to Pixel 11, a spokesperson says NYCHA's reentry program is a nationally recognized model, and the authority does not terminate tenancies based solely on former incarceration. NYCHA recently finished a public process reassessing our policies related to criminal justice, and we are working on implementing policy changes that resulted from that process. Now, Torres does allow NYCHA's family reentry program for formerly incarcerated New Yorkers, which was started in 2013. It was started with 85 former inmates, and since that time, Torres says only one has reoffended. But to date, over 8 years, he says it's only helped 166 former inmates. Both Torres and Assemblyman Burgos are calling on that program to be greatly expanded.